Okay, Alexander. So we have an energy gas stage three panic going on in Germany and energy gas meltdown in the European Union. Gosh, where do I begin? So we had documents for this first turbine sent to Gazprom. Supposedly everything was okay, and everything was going to go back to normal. And literally, pretty much on the same day, we end up with the news that a second turbine now needs repair. From what I understand, it will be under maintenance for 10 days. The 40% gas that's being sent to Germany and to the EU via Nord Stream 1 is now going to be cut down to 20% of capacity. So it's going to be halved. Um, every analyst is saying that this is catastrophic for Germany. They're not going to have the storage levels needed to get them through the winter. They should be announcing a stage three level of an emergency with regards to their energy reserves. Ursula von der Leyen is saying that she is going to find replacements for Russian gas via Nigeria. Nigeria is going to pick up the slack, and they're going to be the ones that come to the EU's rescue. And what else, Alexander? It's just a general meltdown. The price of gas is soaring in Europe. Um, this is a colossal collapse and a colossal catastrophe. And you know what? It shows that Russia had, has, and continues to have all the freaking cards. The EU, they have
Absolutely.
no cards to play. Zero,
Abs-
zero cards to play. Russia's completely in charge.
Absolutely. Can I just say, just before we did this program, I saw that the price of gas in Europe is now running at $2,000 per million cubic meters. I mean, this is, off the scale for this time of year. I mean, it is a disastrous situation. Now, of course, you can take one of two views about this turbine. Firstly, if you want, you can believe that that the Russians are being completely straightforward. You have to one turbine needs refurbishment, and then another turbine needs refurbishment, and you really don't need to see anything behind this. This is all entirely normal routine maintenance of these turbines, and there is really no story here. Or alternatively, you could say that the Russians are playing cat and mouse with the EU. Now, I have to say straightforwardly, I believe the second. I don't think there's anybody, anywhere, who believes the first. I think that's exactly what the Russians are doing. It's what we said a couple of days ago. They're turning the dial up. Sometimes they play it a little the other way, and then they turn it a bit more. They're playing this game with the EU, and they're doing it with immense skill. And of course, what they're also doing is that instead of creating a situation where, they just cut off the gas now, that would create a crisis in Europe. But, a crisis can sometimes be a galvanizing event. It can force people to start doing things. It might give the Europeans the time to make some sort of preparations for the winter. What the Europeans are doing instead is they're arguing with each other. Ursula is coming up with all kinds of plans to cut gas consumption across Europe by 15%. European governments are pushing back. The instinct of European governments at the moment is to hoard, not to share energy, which is completely understandable. We have Orban sending his foreign minister to Moscow to try to get more gas from the Russians, and he's now coming out and saying that there need to be peace negotiations fast. So playing this game of cat and mouse keeps the Europeans divided and panicky and arguing with each other, and makes it more difficult for them to prepare and plan ahead. And it's been extremely skillfully done. And no doubt we'll get this turbine repaired, and then we'll see Nord Stream 1 go up a bit, and then something else will happen, and it'll go down, and these games will continue to be played right through until autumn, until winter comes. And the gas reserves will not be filled, and Europe will be in a very, very difficult crisis. And of course, Ursula comes along. She tells us about Nigeria. Now it's Nigeria. Remember how before it was Qatar? Remember how it was going to be the US? The US was going to ship all these, this vast armada of LNG tankers was coming from the US to supply Europe with LNG. Except, of course, it wasn't. And then Ursula went to Azerbaijan and spoke to the president of Azerbaijan, Mr. Aliyev. And Azerbaijan was going to fill the gap. Except, of course, all of them, the Qataris, the Algerians, the Azeris, are saying, we can't do it. We can't replace Russian gas. We're already providing gas, producing gas at our maximum capacity. We aren't able to do it anymore. And as for the US, what they have to do, because they have an energy crisis themselves in Europe, is that they're going to have to start using more of that LNG within the US itself, because they need to during the winter if they're going to keep energy costs in the US under control. And that means less for Europe. So all of Robert Habeck's heroic statements about how Germany wouldn't need to import gas from Russia by the end of this year, how Germany would be completely self-sufficient, Ursula's plans to cut off oil supplies from Russia, all of that, it's gone catastrophically wrong. And it's exactly what you said. The Russians have all the cards and they're playing them with great skill.
Yeah, the Russians understand, I think, one thing really well, and that is that the European Union, I'm not even going to get to Biden and Trudeau and all of these guys, they understand that the European Union is led by lightweights. They understand. You mentioned leadership, and you mentioned sometimes these things can galvanize countries or certain or blocks of countries to come together and to work together and to figure out these types of problems. But for that, you need leadership. And I think the Russians understand it. We understand it. The people that watch us understand it. I think everyone understands that you're not going to get that from Ursula von der Leyen or Michel or Borrell or any of these guys, or Habeck or Brabach or Olaf Scholz. You might have gotten that, and I'm no fan of hers. From Angela Merkel, you might have gotten that. At least she was clever enough to play the game. But I think the Russians have understood that they are dealing with lightweights. And I'm being very kind in the words that I'm using by calling them lightweights. So with that in mind, what does this really mean for Germany? Because when you talk about bad leadership, boy, does Germany have bad leadership. I mean, it doesn't get any worse than this trio of Three Stooges, Brabach, Habeck, and Schultz. I mean, this is a freaking catastrophe for Germany.
Absolutely. I have to say, I mean, I follow German politics closely. Germany has had very strong, very competent government throughout its entire period since the end of the Second World War. You've had a whole succession of really capable leaders: Adenauer, Brandt, Schmidt, Kohl, Schröder, and Merkel. And now, of course, you have this utterly chaotic, disorganized, hysterical, because, I mean, the language they use is often deeply, deeply hysterical government that has no real control of what it is doing. And, of course, the same goes with the EU. The EU Commission has never looked weaker in terms of the caliber of its leaders than it has looked today. Now, it's never, in my experience, ever looked especially strong. You never want strong people at the head of the EU. But, I mean, you know, Ursula, Borrell, people like that, I mean, they're in a class, Lagarde at the ECB, they're all in a class of their own. I mean, they are terrible leaders. And what happened, it seems to me, is that they're not just terrible leaders, but they're terrible leaders who don't know how to manage things because they've never done it on any significant scale. And above all, they are not leaders who understand energy markets, and they're not leaders who are prepared to listen to those who do. Now, the difference in Moscow is not only do the Russians understand energy markets, and not only do they have the ability to make decisions, but of course, if you follow what goes on in Moscow, they consult widely. I mean, when every week or so, you have a big conference, usually in the Kremlin, which all kinds of people from the expert community, the industry community come together. They talk about, how they're going to steer a way forward in terms of one thing or another. They've had about a week ago a discussion on energy matters, where I'm sure a lot of the decisions we're now seeing being played out were sort of discussed and agreed. We've just had another big discussion on radio electronics, for example. So they understand that you can't just make decisions like the decisions that were made by the EU in February. You can't make them on the fly. You've got to prepare them carefully and think them through. And you've got to be realistic. You can't act on assumptions. One of the reasons the EU is in this crisis is that back in February, they thought that when they imposed all those sanctions on Russia, it would just collapse. They never imagined that they would find themselves now at the end of July in this situation where Russia is not only standing but getting stronger economically, which it is, and where it's able to make these kind of decisions. So they got it wrong at every level. And you're absolutely right. If leaders who have failed so completely before and so catastrophically before are still there, how can you think that they're going to be able to get it right next time in a crisis now?
Yeah, so, before you had the entire EU, all the member states, they were acting in solidarity, probably with the exception of Hungary, even though Hungary also would vote yes for those sanctions. With each sanction package, they managed to get them through. And every country, all the leaders of every country across the EU, they voted for it. And now you're at sanction package number 7, and I imagine we're going to number 8. I can't possibly imagine what they'll find to put in a sanction package 8. But, but for the first time now, you are seeing EU countries start to rebel, may be a little bit too strong of a word, but to voice their discontent with this 15% energy sharing plan floated by the European Commission, by Ursula von der Leyen. And the countries that are rebelling are an interesting mix. Poland, I believe Slovakia and perhaps Slovenia, definitely Portugal, Spain, Greece. I mean, I've heard the argument from Portugal and Spain, which makes perfect sense to me, which is we only get 10% of our gas from Russia. The rest we get from Algeria. So why should we give up 15% of our gas? And all of this is being done to prop up Germany. So for the first time, you're starting to see countries in the EU and a very diverse mix of countries actually come together and say, no, we're not going to do this 15% energy pooling scheme. Because if we do it, it means that our governments are at risk of collapsing. I'll tell you, in Greece, the Mitsotakis government, which has voted yes on every single sanctions package, which has been arming Ukraine to the teeth against the will of the people, of the citizens, they have now said that they're not going to do this energy sharing. They don't approve of this energy sharing scheme because they have come out and said, if we do this, prices are going to skyrocket, the people are going to get extremely upset, and our government faces collapse. I mean, power. They're afraid they're going to lose their power. So what do you make of these dynamics now?
No, I think they're very important. They are extremely important, and you're absolutely right. I think it's more than just dissent. It may not be rebellion, but I think that one shouldn't underestimate the anger in some EU countries, I understand the Spanish in particular, are furious about all of this. And it feeds in to the resentments that have existed for a long time against Germany, that the Germans always wanted their way. They forced all that austerity programs on Southern Europe, a decade ago. And now that Robert Habeck has messed up totally, the Germans expect all the other countries in Europe basically to come to their rescue. And the Spanish, who suffered very heavily from that austerity, are now pushing back. And they say, Habeck led us into this lunacy. Now that he can't honour his checks because he told the German people that he'd got all the gas that Germany needed to cover it and would have it all sewn up by the autumn. Habeck can't, as I said, honour his checks. And he's drawing on us, taking out an overdraft on our account so that he can honour his checks to the German people. And we're not having it. So I think there is real anger, and I think it is building, and there will be growing recriminations. And we will see Habeck starting to blame the Spanish and the Portuguese and all of those, because that's his only real way out of this. He's going to say that these people are failing to show EU solidarity and that they're all acting as Putin's stooges, and that's going to make people in Southern Europe and elsewhere even more angry. And, I can see how this could turn extremely ugly indeed. But as you absolutely rightly say, they don't seem to be able to do the one thing that could perhaps ease us out of this crisis, this immediate crisis, which is to sort of row back on the sanctions, properly row back to the sanctions, seek some kind of negotiated solution over Ukraine, which is what Orban is saying they should do. And then, because relations with Russia have now been damaged beyond repair, try to agree some kind of energy transition so that the Russians have more time to reorient their gas exports east, and the West and Europe in the meantime can try and, find its way towards alternative energy, whatever that is. But that kind of admission of failure and defeat is one that European politicians like Ursula and Habeck and others can't make. By the way, I think the other one who's incredibly vulnerable in all of this is Macron. Because, of course, Macron, much more than Habeck, much more than Ursula, has presented himself to the French people as the great, competent technocrat. He's the person who understands how to run things well. He's the person who understands efficiency. And we see now that, crisis is now escalating in France, and Macron clearly has taken a hard line on all the sanctions packages, despite all his diplomatic double talk with the Russians. And by the way, I think he was extremely unwise to publish the transcript of his conversation with Putin, because it showed the extent of his double talk, trying to persuade Putin basically to drop the Minsk agreements. I mean, it shows that Macron was saying one thing in public, something else in private. But anyway, putting all that aside, I mean, he also, I think, is going to find himself subject to even more criticism in a France which already doesn't like him. And, France has a tradition of popular protest. And I would be extremely careful if I was Macron, and extremely worried if I was Macron, about the situation in France.
All right, so final question. The only way for people like Macron to get out of this mess, and Macron is an opportunist, and he may actually, think of ways like this to save his butt. But the only way for them to get out of this, and I'm going to preface my question by saying every member state in the European Union went along with Ursula von der Leyen's crazy plan and Habeck's crazy plan. They all voted yes for 7 sanction packages. So they're all to blame. But this is politics, and everyone's going to start backstabbing everybody else. But is the way out of this for the Macrons of the world for the Macrons of the European Union, let me say it like that, for the Macrons of the European Union, is the way out of this to get rid of van der Leyen, get rid of Borrell, get rid of Michel, and get rid of Schultz,
Yeah.
Habeck, and Brabach.
Yes.
And only then can you perhaps have some sort of exit out of this mess and have some sort of rollback
Yes.
of,
That's
of
exactly.
the sanctions. Is that feasible? Can that even,
That-
is that possible?
That is, well, first of all, I don't know how possible it is, but I think it is the strategy that they're going to try and follow. At some point, they're all going to say,
I mean, my question, just to preface it, can people like Macron, and I'm not saying it's going to be Macron, do they have the power or the pull to formulate this type of palace intrigue, this type of scheme in order to save their own hide?
yes, they do.
That's kind of like what, yeah.
In my opinion, they absolutely do, and I think it's highly likely that that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to come out and say it was Ursula and Habeck, and to some extent Scholz, who led us up the garden path. They gave us assurances that things could be tied up and sewn up, and they weren't. Habeck, in particular, has told us things that have turned out to be completely untrue. How they ever believe them is another question, but they can pretend that they did. And now that it's all gone hideously wrong, they need to quit the scene, and the government in Germany needs to be reconstituted, and the EU Commission needs to be reconstituted as well. And it's happened in the past. There was the Santerre Commission, which was brought down over corruption allegations and was replaced by a completely different commission. And, they can do it. It is within their power to do it. But will they do it? I mean, the means is there. The machinery to do it is there. But of course, do they have the courage to take on? I don't think Ursula is really the problem. Do they have the courage to take on Habeck and the power in Germany, in Berlin? And of course, beyond that, the people who are backing those people in Berlin, in Washington and London. And that's the unknown question. But of course, necessity, as they say, knows no law. It may very well be that eventually, pushed to the corner with their back against the wall, that's what they will do. They will say it was Habeck especially and Ursula who between them led us into this lunatic situation. They can also blame Angela Merkel for overcommitting Germany to Russian gas, which is a fatuous thing, by the way. We'll discuss that some other day, but that's the story that's been circulated now, that the Germans were wrong to buy all that gas from Russia, and it was a huge mistake that they made, and when Europe is now paying the price. But, they could say that too. They could say that Europe was obviously unprepared, completely unprepared for this kind of scenario, that they'd all been told otherwise, that they'd been misled, and therefore the people who misled them must pay the political price. And then you get a new commission which can then look to try and find some kind of modus vivendi with the Russians. In other words, you look for scapegoats. And I don't know about Habeck, who clearly does have some political support in Germany, but Ursula in particular might find her position very precarious over the next few months.
And I would like to say that Schultz perhaps is dangling on a very thin thread right now. So if like the Macron types do decide to pull this off, I mean, no better time than now. Germany is weak and getting weaker.
Yes.
The United States is a complete, just in disarray. It's a complete mess. The UK is undergoing a change in power where you're going to go from a dumb Boris to a dumber Sunak or Truss. So, I mean, if you're going to pull this off and you're going to find your scapegoats and you're going to put this thing together, I can't think of any better timing than now.
No,
I mean,
absolutely, yeah.
It's perfect timing, actually.
No, absolutely. I completely agree. And I mean, and that's the other thing is, I mean, in Italy, we've seen that, Draghi, and I want to stress this, I've just discussed this in a program that I've just done for my own channel, but Draghi deliberately chose to leave at this time. He engineered this crisis, which has resulted in his removal. In other words, he deserted, he ran away. But in a way, that shows how critical the situation has become. Draghi knows that in Italy he can't avoid responsibility, because he seemed to be saying before the war that he would oppose the sanctions, and then he went along with the hardest of all the sanctions. And the electricity price situation in Italy is catastrophic. But the point is, you're going to have a new government in Italy. They're in a position to say, well, Draghi made a mess, but ultimately he only made a mess because the Germans led us down this disastrous path. And, you know, Italy, France, Spain, all of them coming together. They really wanted to push hard against Germany. This is the moment to do it. They could do it and they could win. Orban as well, Poland,
Macron
Hungary.
doesn't have the luxury.
Macron doesn't.
Yeah.
You know, all of them.
They don't have the luxury of running away either, like Draghi.
No, exactly. Exactly.
You know, Macron
He's
can't-
not. Well,
can't help but
that
leave, yeah.
that is a very good point, actually.
Yeah. So they have to figure out another way to get out of this mess. All right, if they want to get out of this
they want to.
mess.
Well, that is
All
also
right, we
very
will
true.
leave it there. The Duran.locals.com, Odyssey, BitChute, Rumble, and Telegram, and the Duran.locals.com. Did I say that? Yeah, and the Duran shop, 10% off. Use the code. Good day. Take care.